Michael Jackson performed in front of billions of people. Every sequin, every glove, every perfectly tailored jacket became part of history the moment he stepped on stage. Fans studied his every move, his every outfit, frame by frame, for decades. But almost nobody ever asked the one question that actually explains the magic who made those clothes. Who sat up all night making sure a single glove could catch the light from 100 feet away? Who understood Michael Jackson's body, his secrets, his insecurities, better than almost anyone alive? His name was Michael Bush. And for 25 years, he wasn't just a costume designer. He was one of the last people Michael Jackson fully trusted. He dressed him for bad, for dangerous, for history, for every tour and every performance that made Jackson a legend. And in June 2009, Michael Bush did something no fan ever saw coming. He dressed Michael Jackson one final time for his funeral in clothes that were never meant to be finished. So who was this man, and why did Michael Jackson let him get closer than almost anyone else in his life? Let's get into it. And if you love the real stories behind the legend, hit subscribe before we do. The man behind the icon. If you picture Michael Jackson's most famous looks, you're actually picturing Michael Bush's work. The red and black Thriller jacket, the military-style coats from the Bad era, the white glove that somehow became more famous than most pop stars ever get to be. Bush wasn't a celebrity stylist chasing red carpets. He came from a background in theatrical costume construction, the kind of skill built backstage, not on camera. He teamed up with his creative partner, Dennis Tompkins, and together the two of them became the quiet architects behind Michael Jackson's entire visual identity. Their partnership with Jackson began in the early 1980s and lasted 25 years, all the way to his death in 2009. 25 years is longer than most marriages. It's longer than most friendships. And in an industry where people around Michael Jackson came and went constantly, Bush and Tompkins simply stayed. That's the first clue about how much trust was really there. Michael Jackson didn't let strangers get close to his body, his image, or his physical insecurities. He let Michael Bush get closer than almost anyone. Think about everything that changed around Michael Jackson during those 25 years. Albums came and went, tours were announced, canceled, and reinvented. Lawsuits, scandals, marriages, and entire eras of his public life rose and fell around him. Bodyguards left, managers were hired and fired. Even family relationships grew strained and complicated at different points. Through every single one of those storms, one detail stayed constant backstage. Michael Bush, needle in hand, still there, still trusted, still working. That kind of consistency doesn't happen by accident in the entertainment industry. People get replaced, stars get bored or paranoid or convinced that someone new will serve them better. Jackson, by most accounts, was famously particular about who stayed close to him for the long haul. The fact that Bush wasn't just tolerated but kept at the center of Jackson's image for a quarter of a century says everything about the level of trust involved. More than a costume designer. Here's where the relationship goes far beyond fabric and thread. According to Rolling Stone, Bush explained that Jackson's costumes had to function as a kind of second skin, built to move exactly the way his dancing moved and to hit exactly the way the music hit. That meant Bush wasn't just designing clothes. He was studying Michael Jackson's body for decades, understanding how his hips turned, how his ankles bent, how a jacket had to swing at the exact right millisecond to sell an illusion to 18,000 people at once. Think about the intimacy of that. Bush knew things about Michael Jackson's physical habits that almost nobody else on Earth was allowed to know. He knew when Jackson lost water weight mid-show and had to compensate the tailoring in real time. He knew which parts of his body Jackson was self-conscious about and quietly designed around them without ever making it a conversation. And Jackson trusted him completely with that vulnerability. Bush later shared that Jackson wanted his clothing to feel alive, even off his body, telling him his outfits should be entertaining hanging on a rack, not only while he wore them. That's not a note you give a random employee. That's a note you give someone who has become part of your creative soul. Jackson also opened up about his design influences with Bush, revealing his fascination with British royal and military history, and how even his most extravagant stage pieces were built from real historical detail rather than pure fantasy. He didn't have to explain any of that. He wanted to. Take the single white glove, maybe the most recognizable piece of clothing in modern pop culture. It looked simple on television. It wasn't. Getting that glove to catch stage lighting exactly the way Jackson wanted, without slipping during a spin, without pulling attention away at the wrong second, took years of quiet trial and error between Jackson and his design team. So did the shoes. Bush, alongside Tompkins, worked directly with Jackson to help engineer a specially modified shoe that allowed him to lean forward at an impossible angle on stage, one of the illusions that made an entire generation believe Michael Jackson could defy gravity. That wasn't showmanship alone. That was Michael Bush, in a workshop, turning one of Jackson's wildest creative ideas into something that could physically exist. You don't invent gravity-defying shoes with someone you don't trust. You don't let a person study every inch of your movement, your balance, your weight, your body's small daily changes, unless you've already decided they're safe to be that close. the quiet trust nobody talked about. Now, here's the part that separates Bush from almost everyone else who orbited Michael Jackson. Unlike managers, lawyers, and hangers-on who leaked stories to tabloids for decades, Bush stayed almost completely silent while Jackson was alive. No tell-all interviews, no leaked secrets, no cashing in on access. For 25 years, one of the people who knew Michael Jackson most intimately said almost nothing to the outside world. That silence is its own kind of loyalty. In Michael Jackson's world, everyone wanted something from him, a story, a payday, a headline. Bush and Tompkins wanted none of that. They just kept showing up, tour after tour, decade after decade, quietly building the wardrobe of the most photographed man on the planet. And there's something else worth noticing. Jackson surrounded himself with dancers, choreographers, and producers who worked with him in bursts, one album cycle at a time. But Bush was a constant, Bad in 1987, Dangerous in 1992, History in 1996 and 1997. This Is It, the tour that never happened, in 2009. Across all of it, one designer, working alongside his partner, Dennis Tompkins. One trusted set of hands, called back again and again, tour after tour, decade after decade. It's worth pointing out how rare that silence actually is. Almost everyone who spent real time inside Michael Jackson's world eventually wrote a book, sat for a tell-all interview, or sold a story to a magazine. Bush waited until years after Jackson's death, and even then, his book focused on craftsmanship and creative partnership rather than gossip. That says something about what kind of relationship this actually was. It wasn't access. It was genuine collaboration built on years of earned trust. So why did Michael Jackson let this one man in for a quarter of a century when so many others were kept at arm's length or cycled out entirely? Part of it was simple necessity. Jackson's entire artistry depended on the illusion working perfectly, night after night, in front of tens of thousands of people who had paid to see perfection. That required someone who understood his body almost better than a doctor would, someone who could notice a costume was half an inch off before Jackson even felt it himself. There was no room for ego or carelessness in that relationship. Bush had to be precise, patient, and endlessly loyal to the vision, night after night, city after city. But part of it was clearly personal, too. You don't let someone dress you, undress you, and rebuild your public image for 25 straight years unless something deeper than a paycheck is holding that relationship together. Jackson trusted very few people with his physical vulnerability, with the parts of himself that never made it into a magazine spread. Bush was one of the very few, tour after tour, without ever once betraying it. There's also the matter of Dennis Tompkins, Bush's longtime creative partner, who worked alongside him for the entire 25 years until his death in 2011. Jackson didn't just trust one outsider. He trusted a small, tightly bonded team that never changed, never leaked, and never seemed to want anything from him beyond the work itself. In a world built on access and exploitation, that kind of stability must have felt like solid ground. The final, heartbreaking goodbye. But this story has an ending that hits differently than most Michael Jackson stories because it isn't about scandal or fame. It's about devotion. In June 2009, Michael Jackson was preparing for the biggest comeback of his life, the This Is It residency in London. Bush and Tompkins were, as always, in the middle of building an entirely new wardrobe for the tour. Dozens of garments were still unfinished, mid-stitch, mid-fitting, waiting for a man who was supposed to wear them on stage in just a few weeks. Then Michael Jackson died. Every costume designer in that position would have been left with a closet full of unfinished dreams. But Michael Bush wasn't done yet. In one of the most quietly devastating acts of loyalty in modern pop culture history, Bush was the one who dressed Michael Jackson for the final time, preparing him for his funeral. 25 years after their first fitting together, his last act for Michael Jackson was making sure he looked like himself one final time, in front of a grieving world. Bush later spent years honoring that relationship the right way, publishing The King of Style Dressing Michael Jackson, a tribute built not around gossip or controversy, but around craftsmanship, respect, and 25 years of shared history. Reviewers who read it noted that it captured a side of Jackson the headlines never showed, a meticulous, thoughtful artist who cared deeply about every detail of how he presented himself to the world. It would have been easy for Bush to disappear quietly after 2009, to let the wardrobes, the sketches, and the memories fade into private grief the way so many people around Jackson chose to do. Instead, he spent years going back through decades of fittings, tour notes, and unfinished garments, making sure the craftsmanship behind Michael Jackson's image was remembered accurately by the one person who actually built it, rather than left to rumor and speculation. For decades, the world watched Michael Jackson's costumes and called them iconic. Almost nobody asked who built the trust behind them. But one man spent 25 years earning the right to dress the most photographed performer in history, and then spent one final heartbreaking afternoon making sure that same performer left the world looking exactly like the king of pop the world remembered. Not with fame, not with headlines, just with a needle, a thread, and 25 years of quiet, unbroken loyalty. So tell me in the comments, had you ever heard of Michael Bush before this video? And if you want more true stories about the real people behind the legend, hit subscribe because there's a lot more coming.